Next, we are joined by Dr. Craig Martell, DoD Chief Digital and AI Officer at the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office of the United States, and Alexandr Wang, founder and CEO of Scale AI. Prior to his role at the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office of the United States, Dr. Martell was head of machine learning at Lyft, head of machine intelligence at Dropbox, and led a number of AI teams and initiatives at LinkedIn, including the development of the LinkedIn AI Academy. Dr. Martell was a tenured professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Dr. Martell holds a doctorate in computer science from the University of Pennsylvania and is co-author of Great Principles of Computing, published by MIT Press in 2015. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Craig Martell and Alexandr Wang.
I've been looking forward to this, Dr. Martell.
Please come in, Craig.
Craig, obviously we had a spirited conversation about geopolitics and Ukraine and China here with Eric earlier, and so I think this will be a lot of fun. To kind of start out with to kind of start sowing the seeds. I think that you're sort of you really built up a lot of your career in the private sector, in Silicon Valley, in the tech industry out here, and then now you're sort of taking your stab at serving our country as the CDAO of the Department of Defense. What drove your decision to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what you and Eric were talking about. It's being mission driven. So before joining LinkedIn, I was a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. So I was, from 9/11 on, I sort of switched my academic career towards military things, and that was really meaningful to me. And then I went into industry. I was there for about 9 years, and I'll go back. And there's a real value to industry. There's an excitement about industry. There's work getting done there that's not getting done anywhere else, right? And I think that's both good and bad. But I also felt a mission, a lack of a mission. And if I'm really honest, I think it's Eric's fault. And I do, actually.
Hot take?
I do. I was feeling this need to be more mission driven, so I volunteered for Schmidt Futures. And the one and only thing I did for Schmidt Futures was help them evaluate the kind of person they want for this job. And so I was in this conversation. There was a couple of VPs from Google, some folks from Amazon, myself, and we were talking about what this job should look like. And then about 2 weeks later, I got an email from the Deputy Secretary of Defense asking me to apply. So I'm pretty sure the whole thing was set up to be a covert interview.
He had a large part. That's great for our country. I think one of the things that I'm really curious to get your thoughts on. You've been in the seat for
4 months.
4 months, so enough time to sort of
to not know what I'm doing. Yeah.
But obviously, I think the Department of Defense is a massive organization with a very broad mission set and an incredible complexity as an organization, and the sort of the mandate to try to figure out how to bring artificial intelligence to the department is an incredibly broad and difficult mandate. I'm curious, how are you thinking of approaching that?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So first of all, my role is really weird. So it's the largest organization in the world. I would argue probably the most heterogeneous organization in the world. And it's made up of genuine sovereigns that don't actually have to listen to one another. So there's a great deal of influence that has to happen in order to make this work. And I think it's wrong but my job is not just the chief AI officer. I'm also the chief data officer and the chief analytics officer. I think it's important to say that because the right way to approach this is on a hierarchy of needs. And I think you and your company are tackling it exactly the right way. We got to get the data right. And if we can get the data right, AI is going to come for free. And we can talk about why I think that. But AI over time is just going to happen in the department. I'm very confident about that. But it's not going to happen until we get the data layer right. So my real drive is about how do we find, we can't centralize the data because we have at least exabytes of data, maybe greater than exabytes of data. So how do we find the 15% of the data tables that drive 60 to 70% of the value? How do we find a way to centralize those? How do we find what are essentially product managers to make sure that those tables are being produced correctly, have customers, have SLAs? So really tactical, kind of low-level work. And we can talk about how we're getting at that. But if we get that, if I can leave with that 15% in a good state and an infrastructure that allows the work that your team does to write back into that infrastructure, then I think we're going to have built a virtuous cycle that's going to allow for the growth that we need. I mean, I have to believe that, right? I can't solve the whole thing. And I really do believe AI will come for free if we get that part right.
Yeah. And what do you think are the sort of the, what do you think are the biggest hurdles in the way of building this data foundation for the future of the DoD?
Rice bowls, right?
Please explain.
People, if I give you my data, the leadership, have insight into what I'm doing in an unmassaged way, and I can't present to you the view that I want you to see. Like, I'm never going to lie to you, but boy, if I show it to you only via PowerPoint, I can sure put a gloss on it. I can sure spin it. But if it's a live dashboard that you could look at any time you want to, then I'm naked with respect to my data. So I don't think anybody genuinely believes that's bad. If you have a conversation with them, I think people see the real value in that for the organization as a whole. I think the default assumption is, you don't come in here. You're not an expert here. I don't want you to come in and tell me what to do. And I think there's a lot of those sorts of enclaves. I don't think I'm talking out of school there. I think that's pretty well known.
Yep. You mentioned this thing that I think is really interesting. I want to come back to it, which is, if we get the data right, then AI will happen within the department. Full stop, no matter what.
Yep.
And I want you to explain yourself a little bit because it's.
But get the data right is huge, right?
Right. Yeah. But if we could just do that, I mean, why are you so confident that AI pops out of that?
Well, okay, so I've been listening to the whole day, and I really enjoyed all of the conversations, and particularly what you and Eric were talking about. This is transforming the world. It is going to transform the world. The demand signal is really strong internal to the department, and contractors are showing up with AI-infused solutions, which is the right thing. So AI is happening anyway. AI is happening massively across the department. The problem, as I see it, is if I were to, well, you're a vendor, so I don't want to pick on you. If I were to buy an AI solution from you, you're going to want to sell me a vertical solution that goes all the way from the data, all the way up to the delivery of that value, and that entire pipe will be owned by you. That's what's happening now. And I'm not trying to stop that, because that is the way AI is getting delivered in the department. If we get the data right, then I can insist that you as a vendor, and then actually you as a vendor, play with our data. We can say, this is what we want, this is the data that we're going to provide, and the contract requires you to write your inferences back into our data lake. So getting that right, so the AI is happening anyway. Getting the data right allows me to build a marketplace that I think does AI correctly.
Yeah. One thing that, speaking of contractors, one thing I have a lot of thoughts on is sort of the existing defense industrial base, right? There are this set of companies that have been building our defense technology for decades and decades and decades, and they're very trusted, and they end up working on most of the important projects of the government. Notably missing from that set of companies are many of the innovative tech companies that are from here in Silicon Valley.
That's right.
I think this is a really big problem. That I think we need more, of the cutting edge technologists integrated into the defense industrial base, and it's a fundamental issue. What are your thoughts on this? As somebody who was at these cutting edge, Silicon Valley companies, saw what they
Lyft
could do.
didn't sell to the government very much.
Fair enough, but you see what's possible in those organizations, and you also see the problems that the government has.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you to you and your company, because I think you did something that needs to happen much more often, which is to ask, with respect to the DoD, what's the long pole in the tent? What's really stopping us from scaling AI? it's not algorithms. And if you're a big company, it's not data. And if you're an app company, you get all of your labels for free, right? Every one of your users labels your data all the time. But the long pole in the tent for something like the DoD or many of the other companies that you want to service is, how do we get data with appropriate labeling so that it's like, if you give me a cleanly labeled data set, I don't care what the algorithm is, right? I'm going to find, we'll use Google AutoML and we'll just find the right model, right? That's not the problem. The problem is getting that labeled data. So I want to say I appreciate that you're tackling it that way. I completely agree that we need the innovation of Silicon Valley. I think this marketplace I describe allows for that because the older school primes, who are still doing remarkable value, bringing remarkable value and doing great things, sort of have a lock on this vertical way of doing things. But if we create a marketplace where you don't need as much to show up and play, you can bring your model, use our data, and then win, then I think we're going to open that up. Open it up to smaller companies, innovative companies. And we have something out that's down in Moffett Field called the Defense Innovation Unit.
DIU.
DIU.
Yeah.
And they're specifically trying to match smaller companies with customers who are ready to pay in the Department of Defense. So we recognize this as a whole, that it can't just be the traditional defense industrial base. We really need to actually include innovative companies in academia as well as the defense industrial base, because this is what's going to help America stay on top of things.
Yep, totally. What do you think, let's speak as a broader community, both the tech community and the defense community together, what do you think we're not moving fast enough on right now?
I need really boring things. So can I change your question?
Sure.
I don't think that you need to go faster. I think you need to provide things you're not providing. I need best practices as a service, right? I need to impose upon model practitioners. For the DoD, we're going to have very few model builders. We're going to have people who know, at best, what we need are people who know how to say, I need a model here, and then think about how to utilize that model. But they're not going to know how to label the data, right? That's something that data labeling as a service is something we desperately need broadly. And then we need test and evaluation as a service. I think you're talking to someone from my team later this week, Jane Pinellas, who does test and evaluation for us. Test and evaluation as a service. So if you work for the government and you contract a model, how do we know it's doing the right things? How do we know it's safe, right? So we need the stuff on the left, and we need the stuff on the right, which would be model monitoring as a service. When you ship this model, how do you know that when drift happens, how are you getting the drift back? How are you correcting it as it goes along? And as we talked about, when you ship a model at Lyft or at Google or at Amazon, your customers are always sort of giving you that feedback loop. But how do we build a feedback loop, say for a search and rescue? That was one of your examples earlier,
yep.
Right? How do we design the interface in such a way that labeling is correcting the labeling is a natural part of it, right? So I think the two buzz phrases I'd want to leave everybody with is we need best practices as a service, and we need AI by design. I don't think we bring design enough into to using of models, right? A user that gets an inference from a device, it doesn't say, this is 0.75 confidence, and this is what it means to be 0.75 confidence. It just gives them an answer, and they treat that as truth. That's a real problem in the military context. On the other side, when they say it's wrong, there's not a clean, easily designed way to say, but here's the right answer.
Right.
Right. So it's not really speed I need. I just need a better scaffolding around the model.
I mean, it's a very systems level view that I think you're taking.
Yeah.
It's very, these are the building blocks, these are the fundamental foundations that we need to then unlock huge amounts of innovation, once we're through with this.
It's also a talent management point of view, because I don't think we're going to have the MIT grads and the Stanford grads building models and engineering the pipelines. we're going to have people from all over the country. We're going to have military and civilian, and they're not going to have all kinds of experience, and they are at best going to be model usage practitioners and not engineers. So I need the tools to allow them to do the right thing.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Another question I think is really important is how do we best align the incentives of these innovative Silicon Valley companies and the government to actually enable us to sort of come together and build great technology together. And obviously we've sort of had this period where, if anything, the hill and the valley are sort of warring and not really talking to one another per se. What do you think is sort of do you have an idea as a path there?
We were talking, Ray and I were talking earlier about the degree to which national defense is even discussed in this forum, and that's not the norm in Silicon Valley. I think there's two chasms. There's two misunderstandings. On the Hill side, they believe that you're going to show up with magical pixie dust, which solves all of our problems. So, by the way, when the Pentagon says AI, they almost always mean I need clean data and an analytics dashboard, right? They don't actually mean that they need AI, right? They just want to be able to see where their tanks are easily, right? So, and so when they say AI, when the Hill says AI, they just believe Silicon Valley is going to show up, sprinkle some pixie dust, and everything's going to magically work, right? The good part of Skynet, right? Not the bad part of Skynet. And on the Silicon Valley side, there's this reticence to want to do anything that has anything to do with national defense or national security. Ukraine's not a good thing by any means, but a positive side effect of Ukraine is I think the Valley has remembered that there are autocracies in the world, and that we actually have to pay attention to the fact that there are autocracies. And then I think it's in part my job to make the Hill understand that this is really about data and about best practices and not about magical pixie dust.
Yeah. And what do you think are the, if you were to say, I bet you've actually even stated some of these, what do you think are the milestones or the sort of the things that we should be aiming for to know that we're on track as a country, as the Department of Defense, in building towards this AI-enabled future?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating one. If we can get this marketplace of the data is really readily available and every company feels like they can easily show up and play in that game, then I think we've made huge strides. Because I think how are we going to compete in this race against China is we're going to use the American academic industrial base and all of the innovation there. When we fought World War II, the DoD didn't build planes. They contracted with companies to build planes. We didn't build Jeeps. We contracted with Willis, I think, to build Jeeps. If we're going to compete in this race, notice I didn't say win because I think it's a race forever. If we're going to compete in this race, we have to contract with the people who can do the work. And so an earmark that we're successful is that Silicon Valley wants to contract with us, wants to help fight these battles with us, and that we make it as easy. We don't make it easy, right? The work on our side has to make it as easy as possible for you to show up and play.
Yeah, and I'm super passionate about this as well. I really hope that as many startups as possible sort of take a national security pledge, if you will, and devote themselves to work in this.
It's hard though, right? Because what we offer is money, and that's not what a startup needs. A startup needs a guaranteed customer that's going to maintain, and that's the part we don't offer, right? That's the part where you build a prototype, and then we say, okay, we'll be back in 2.5 years. And a startup's not going to sit around waiting for 2.5 years. They have much more, many other things they have to get done.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
One of the things I'm curious if you have a view on is, obviously AI has potential widely across the entire department in helping to optimize logistics and make all of our systems better. And there's a lot of back office use cases. There's obviously a lot of warfighting.
There's billions of dollars in back office use cases. Let's be clear about that. That's actually remarkably important.
Right. And so it's this incredibly important component of it. I'm curious if you have a view as to what are the key AI capabilities that that you're looking for the department to build up or develop over the course of, call it the next 5 years. One concept that's talked about a lot is JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, which is sort of heavily related to artificial intelligence, obviously. So I'm curious what your perspective is.
So just about JADC2, JADC2 is not necessarily about AI. JADC2 is really a networking problem. And how do we take all of the sensors that we have and join them together so we could have situational awareness and more easily make decisions. But one of the things that can go into JADC2 are inferences, inferences made, and they'll just be part of that data stream. What are the wins? What are the big wins in AI, right? So if you listen to this conference, the big wins are really threefold. Well, modulo Daphne's talk, right? There were some really cool wins there. Yeah, that was great. There's wins in vision, right? And we know why. There's wins in language, transformers, right? And we know why. And there's wins in speech. These are the three things these are the three domains that have really exploded. And I think there's obviously use cases for each of those, right? There's speech interfaces or translation abilities, right? These are extremely important. Getting translation right, I think, is going to be really important. Just textual analysis, given the massive number of documents we have. As you pointed out with the logistics for supply chain, anything we can do to get documents more easily understood with a good semantic summary is going to be really helpful, right? And of course, vision is going to be really helpful. And those things I think are actually taking place. We're getting lots of interaction with the industry on those things. Here's something I'd really like to see, though. You mentioned logistics, but I don't know how much work's actually happening in the planning part of logistics, right? The document analysis, for sure. So I would love to see things like, how can we leverage reinforcement learning modern reinforcement learning techniques to think about logistics. Right. I mean, there are, as I said before, literally billions of dollars to be saved if we can get logistics right. And so if you could think about these sort of systems issues we have, not just the weapons issues, I think there's this. I don't want to say that they're sexy. The things that people usually think about are the weapons issues. Right. But I think the real issues are how do we run our business better.
I mean, a world where Google saved, I think the number was billions of dollars on their data centers, right, by applying reinforcement learning. You can apply that to any sort of complex system that requires lots of multi-dimensional optimization.
I just want to be clear. We have more assets under management than Google, Walmart, and Apple combined. We have logistics challenges greater than all of those companies. Like, I know Amazon has awesome logistics challenges. Ours are orders of magnitude more difficult. So any sort of robust logistics solutions, even if they save a small percentage, will have massive taxpayer impact.
Yeah. I want to pivot in the last little bit here to what's at stake. You mentioned that the mission is really what brought you back to the department and back to serving our nation. Thank you so much, by the way. I think
my pleasure.
A technologist who understands technology incredibly deeply, has built a lot of incredible technology. Going to the department is an incredible service. So thank you so much. But you mentioned
we really have to thank my wife. Let's be clear.
Well, let's call her up. But I'm sure there's more there. I'm sure obviously the world is sort of getting trickier and trickier by the day. I saw some there was some news that some intelligence analysts believe that the probability of nuclear war is potentially as high as 20%, which is extremely uncomfortable. What would you say? What is at stake for you? What do you think is the what are the stakes?
I'm old, and so the things I'm going to say are going to sound like old man, thinking back. But I don't think we have the courage of our convictions anymore as a nation. We used to believe that. We used to say, we didn't always act that way, but we used to believe that we wouldn't do business with countries that had poor human rights. And now we completely fund China's manufacturing at the same time that they are doing genocide against the Uyghurs. That just infuriates me. Imagine during the Cold War, that we were also funding the Soviet economy, right? We won that war. There are echoes of it, so winning it's too strong. But we won that long-term battle because we bankrupted them. And we are simultaneously fighting with China and funding their entire economy because we want cheap goods. This infuriates me. We don't have the courage of our convictions. It's not exactly the question you asked, but it's really the motivating factor for me. So we have this really odd situation where we want to run this race with someone that we are claiming as our enemy at the same time that we're fueling them with everything that they need to do that. And I am sufficiently globalist that I'm not bothered by helping every country. I'm bothered by not having the courage of our convictions to say, that's behavior that we don't believe in. We're not going to support that behavior. It's okay that you believe it. It's fine. But we're not going to support that behavior.
Yeah.
So I actually forget your question. I used it as a soapbox. I apologize.
No. I think you're making an important point, which is that, do we believe this is a race or not? And how would we act if we truly believe this was the race that would define?
And I guess I'm very frustrated that we actually think democratic values are quaint at this point. Like, this is the old man in me, but we all sort of talk like, oh, well, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, these things don't really matter anymore. And that just really, really saddens me.
Yeah.
I feel honored to be able to be fighting every day next to folks who are standing up for these values.
Yeah. So, I mean, frankly, I think we're entering a period where it's going to become more front and center. And I think that, in some ways, if you look at the history of humanity, other than this past 100 years, it was shaped by war. And this past 100 years, we've had this sort of...
I would argue the Cold War had a great deal to shape who we are now, right?
Right. But for sure. But it's sort of this unusual period of peace, and I think that it's tough to appreciate that.
We all grew up under the umbrella of peace. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I do want to say something about how this, I actually believe, that there's an international solution. I don't think this is an American solution. Eric mentioned that all of the 65% of the papers were written by non-Americans. I think that's how we win. I think we change immigration so that the smartest people in the world come here and want us to fight. And then we encourage them to stay here, and we help them continue to make this the best place to live and the best place, and a place to lead the world. The guy from Der Spiegel, I think, asked a question about, is this a U.S.-led or is it a NATO thing? I don't think we can do this without partners all agreeing. I don't want to be jingoistic. I don't think this is America first. I don't think that's the answer. I think it's a coalition of people all over the world who don't want autocracy. I don't think we... That was good. We can't see you from up here, so I didn't know people were going to clap.
I mean, I think it's a clear mission, and it's one that we certainly subscribe to.
And I'm appreciative of that.
Yeah, one of I think one of my sub goals of this event was to hopefully encourage more technologists to get involved and get engaged with some of these applications of AI technology that I believe are critically important for this next phase of the world. If you were to sort of speak individually to each of those technologists that now is sort of inspired to work on national security problems, what advice would you give them?
Understand, I'm going to repeat myself, but understand that the thing that excites in Silicon Valley isn't necessarily going to be the thing that excites for the military. It has to have real clear mission value and usability parameters around it. So, for example, we spent a lot of time today talking about GPT-3 and generating text. By the way, I can't stand the Google predictions. Sorry, Eric. Right? Like I think I write better than that. Right? Or generating pictures. There's nothing about that as it stands that has any value. right? Generating text or generating pictures, as they stand now, aren't going to bring value to the DoD mission. But maybe you could think hard about how you could couch that. Could you generate blog posts that would actually have value and that we can demonstrate have that kind of value? So I would caution you to get too caught up in how exciting the technology is here and how exciting the technology is for consumer use, and work with us through DIU, through my office, to see how we can shape your idea to actually have real DoD use, and then think about what the scaffolding around it is going to be necessary for using it. And I understand, like I've been in Silicon Valley, that's not what we like to do. That's not the fun stuff. And I want to say that we can help you with that. We can help you figure out what scaffolding is needed, but there's going to have to be an iteration loop where you engineer those aspects into your product, right? I mean, that's why I pointed out the data labeling. You tackled the most boring part of AI. You tackled the part of AI that nobody wants to do.
Hopefully,
right?
I'm a more interesting person, but yes.
No, yeah, I think you did exactly the right. I think you're in lots of ways genius for thinking about that, right? Because that was the piece that people were dropping on the floor. Instead of labeling new data, I'm just giving you praise now, so take it. So,
thank you.
Instead of labeling new data, they would just find this data over here, whose labels did not answer their hypothesis at all, and they would use it because it seemed close enough. And that might work when selling shirts, because you went from a 75% click-through rate or dwell rate to an 80%. But that doesn't work in under conditions where getting it wrong has real costs. You can't just be flippant like that, right? So. And that's the other thing, if I can just add one more thing, I know I'm out of time, sorry about that, is think hard about the costs of a false positive in a DoD context, and think hard about the cost of a false negative in a DoD context. And if all targets are equally valuable, I don't mean targets as in shooting things, but things we're trying to find with our AI. If all targets are equally valuable, then the standard process of giving me a positive cue and having me edit that cue and say, well, that was a false positive, that was a false positive, but the rest of them can go through, that standard process, that's fine. But not all targets are equally valuable in our context. So as we're spending our energy staring at that cue and editing that cue, there's a whole field of false negatives out here that represent real danger. And so we really need, and it's incumbent upon my team to help you all think about this, but we really need a different way to think about the modeling problem itself. It's not find me ranking of things that could bring value, because the things that you missed are very dangerous. Does that make sense?
Makes 100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your service, Craig, and thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.